Every physicist knows that the second law of thermodynamics is the most unbreakable, most ironclad, most absolutely certain law in all of science. Arthur Eddington once said something to the effect of, "If your theory disagrees with the second law, there is no hope for it. It must collapse." And I think most people, if you asked them on the street, if you said, "Why do we get old? Why does everything fall apart?" they would say, even if they didn't know the fancy words, they would say something like, "Well, that's just how the universe works. Things wear out. Things decay. Entropy goes up. You can't fight it." And if you are a physicist, you might nod along because it sounds very reasonable. The universe is marching toward disorder. That's the arrow of time. Well, that's why your coffee gets cold, your car rusts, your hair goes gray, and eventually you die. Physics said so. Case closed. That is completely wrong, and I can prove it. Not partly wrong, not a little misleading. The core claim that aging is some thermodynamic inevitability, that physics itself demands you fall apart, is just flat out incorrect. And the amazing thing is, the physics that proves it wrong has been sitting right under our noses the whole time. We just weren't looking at it carefully enough. So let's look at it carefully. Let's start with the thing everyone agrees on, and then I'll show you where the crack is, and then the whole wall comes down, and then we'll build something much more interesting in its place. All right, the second law of thermodynamics. What does it actually say? I want to be very precise here, because the sloppy version of it is what gets everyone into trouble. The precise version says this: in a closed system, one that doesn't exchange energy or matter with its surroundings, the total entropy will either stay the same or increase over time. That's it. That's the whole law. Entropy, which you can think of as a measure of disorder or randomness, or more accurately, as a measure of how many microscopic arrangements correspond to the same macroscopic state, goes up or stays flat, never goes down, in a closed system. And it is a magnificent law. It's the reason heat flows from hot things to cold things and not the other way around. It's the reason you can scramble an egg, but you can't unscramble one. It's the reason a glass can fall off a table and shatter into 1,000 pieces, but you will never ever see 1,000 pieces of glass leap off the floor and assemble themselves into a wine glass and jump back onto the table. That would be a decrease in entropy, and the second law forbids it, in a closed system. So here's the argument for why aging is just entropy doing its thing. Your body is made of molecules. Those molecules are arranged in fantastically precise structures, proteins folded, just so, membranes layered perfectly, DNA coiled and packed with extraordinary care. That is a very low entropy state, a very ordered, very improbable arrangement of matter. And the second law says, over time that order will degrade, proteins will misfold, membranes will leak, DNA will accumulate errors. The whole exquisite machine will slowly, relentlessly, inevitably slide toward chaos. That's aging. That's death. That's the second law of thermodynamics, written in flesh. Sounds pretty airtight, doesn't it? And I would agree with you, it sounds very convincing. I've seen auditoriums full of physics students nod along with this argument. I've read it in popular science books. I've heard it at cocktail parties from people who should know better. Entropy gets us all in the end. It's treated as one of those profound truths that separates the educated from the naive. And there's an emotional satisfaction to it, isn't there? It feels like wisdom, like accepting the deep truth of the universe. There's almost a nobility to it, standing there and saying, yes, the second law applies to me too. I am not special. I am just matter, arranged temporarily, and the universe will reclaim me. Well, nobility is nice, but I prefer being correct, because there is one enormous, glaring, obvious problem with this entire argument that somehow people just skate right past. You are not a closed system. That's it. That's the crack. Everything I just said about the second law is true, but it only applies to closed systems. And you, my friend, are about as far from a closed system as it is possible to be. You eat food, you breathe air, you radiate heat, you excrete waste. You are an open system, magnificently and continuously exchanging energy and matter with your environment. And the second law says nothing, absolutely nothing about what entropy must do in an open system. In an open system, entropy can go down locally. All you have to do is pay for it somewhere else. You decrease entropy here, you increase it more over there, and the total goes up, and the second law is perfectly happy. This is not some clever loophole. This is the actual physics. And if you don't believe me, look around. Look at a tree. A tree takes carbon dioxide and water and sunlight, and it assembles them into wood and leaves and bark, which are incredibly ordered structures. That is a massive local decrease in entropy. The tree pays for it by radiating heat into the environment and by increasing the entropy of the sunlight it absorbs. The total entropy of the universe goes up, but the tree, locally, becomes more ordered. Not less, more. Or look at a baby. A fertilized egg, one single cell, takes in nutrients from its mother and builds itself into a human being. Trillions of cells, hundreds of cell types, organs, bones, a brain with 100 billion neurons wired together with exquisite precision. That is an almost incomprehensible decrease in local entropy. That baby is getting more ordered, not less. And it does this for years. For about 20 years, in fact, a human being is getting more complex, more structured, more organized. Where is the second law? Where is the inevitable march toward disorder? It's there. The total entropy of the universe is going up the whole time. That the baby is radiating heat, producing waste, and generating plenty of disorder in the environment to more than pay for its own increasing order. The point is this: the second law does not forbid local decreases in entropy. Life itself is a local decrease in entropy. If the second law forbade aging reversal, it would also forbid growing up, healing a wound, and building a tree. Obviously, it doesn't forbid those things because they happen every single day. Your body right now, as you sit here, is performing acts of anti-entropy that would make a physicist's head spin if they really stopped to think about it. Your cells are synthesizing thousands of different proteins from amino acid building blocks, folding each one into precisely the right three-dimensional shape. Your immune system is identifying foreign invaders out of trillions of possible molecular shapes and manufacturing custom antibodies to neutralize each one. Your nervous system is maintaining billions of synaptic connections at exact strengths. All of this is local entropy decrease paid for by the metabolic heat you radiate into the room. You are a furnace of order, burning fuel to stay organized. And here is what really gets me. Your body replaces itself constantly. Most of the atoms in your body right now were not in your body a year ago. The lining of your gut replaces itself every few days. Your red blood cells live about 4 months. Your skin cells cycle in a few weeks. Your skeleton is completely rebuilt every decade or so. You are not the same physical stuff you were 10 years ago. The matter has been swapped out, like replacing every plank on a ship while it's still sailing. Yet you persist, your structure persists, your memories persist, your identity persists. How? Because the pattern is maintained. The information is maintained. The stuff doesn't matter. The arrangement of the stuff, the information about how it's organized, that's what matters. Remember that, because that observation that the stuff doesn't matter but the information does is the key to everything I'm about to tell you. So, if the second law doesn't demand that you age, what does? Why do we get old? If the physics permits a local decrease in entropy, if the physics permits us to get more ordered rather than less, why doesn't the body just keep maintaining itself forever? This is where it gets interesting. Because the answer is not about energy, it's not about entropy, it's about information. Let me try an analogy, and I want you to hold on to this analogy because it's going to carry us a long way. Imagine you have a grand piano, a beautiful instrument, perfectly tuned, every string at exactly the right tension, every hammer at exactly the right distance. You can play Beethoven on it, you can play anything. It's a magnificent machine. Now suppose I asked you, does the second law of thermodynamics mean this piano will eventually go out of tune? And you'd say, well, sure. Over time, the strings will stretch, the wood will warp, the felts will wear down. And that's true. But here's the thing. The piano didn't go out of tune because the universe lacks the energy to keep it in tune. Energy is cheap. There is plenty of energy available to tighten a string. The piano went out of tune because nobody tightened the strings. The problem isn't energy. The problem is that the information about what the correct tuning is and the mechanism for maintaining it gradually got lost or degraded. And that, in a very deep sense, is what aging is. Your body has plenty of energy. You eat food every day. You take in far more energy than you need for basic maintenance. The problem is not that the engine is running out of fuel. The problem is that the instructions for running the engine are getting corrupted. Let me be more precise. Every cell in your body contains a complete copy of your DNA, your genome, the whole blueprint, all 3 billion or so letters of it. And that blueprint is remarkably stable. The DNA sequence you had when you were born is, with very few exceptions, the same DNA sequence you'll have when you die. The letters don't change much. The book doesn't get rewritten. But here's the crucial thing. Having the book is not enough. You also need to know which pages to read. A liver cell and a brain cell have the exact same DNA, the exact same book. But they are wildly different cells with different shapes, different functions, different proteins. How is that possible? Because they are reading different chapters. Different genes are turned on and off in each cell type, and the system that controls which genes are on and which genes are off, that system, that layer of control above the genes themselves, is called the epigenome. Think of the DNA as a massive instruction manual. Every cell has the same manual, but the epigenome is like a set of bookmarks and sticky notes and highlighting that tells each cell which pages of the manual to read. The liver cell has one set of bookmarks. The brain cell has a different set. The muscle cell has yet another. And these bookmarks are physical, actual chemical modifications. Little chemical tags, methyl groups, acetyl groups, attached to the DNA itself or to the proteins that the DNA wraps around, called histones. These tags are the epigenome. They are the reading instructions layered on top of the genetic instructions. And the system is staggeringly complex. Your DNA, if you stretched it out, would be about 2 meters long, but it has to fit inside a cell nucleus that's about 6/millionths of a meter across. So the DNA wraps around these histone proteins like thread around tiny spools, and then the spools stack on top of each other, and the whole thing folds and coils into this incredibly dense structure called chromatin. Some regions of the chromatin are tightly packed, which means the DNA there can't be read. Other regions are loosely packed, which means the genes there are accessible and active. The epigenome controls this packaging. Methyl groups on the DNA itself tend to silence genes, keep them locked away. Acetyl groups on the histones tend to open things up, make genes accessible. So the combination of all these chemical marks determines at any given moment which of your 20,000 or so genes are turned on and which are turned off in each cell. That's how a liver cell knows it's a liver cell. That's how a neuron knows it's a neuron. The epigenome is the cell's identity. And here is the key insight. The genome is digital. It's made of 4 letters, A, T, C, G, and those letters are copied with extraordinary fidelity every time a cell divides. The error rate is fantastically low, something like 1 mistake per billion letters per cell division. Remarkable. But the epigenome is more like an analog signal. It's fuzzier. It's more susceptible to noise. Every time a cell divides, the epigenetic marks have to be copied onto the new DNA strands. And that copying process is good but not perfect. And even between cell divisions, the marks can drift. Environmental stress, DNA damage that needs repair, normal metabolic activity. All of these things cause the epigenetic marks to shift around. Over time, these bookmarks start to drift. They get put in the wrong place. Some fall off. Some get added where they shouldn't be. The bookmarks get scrambled. What happens when the bookmarks get scrambled? The cell starts reading the wrong pages. A liver cell might turn on a gene that's supposed to be active only in a skin cell. A brain cell might turn off a gene it desperately needs. The cell starts to lose its identity. It doesn't know quite what it's supposed to be anymore. It becomes a confused, malfunctioning version of its younger self. And this loss of epigenetic information, this scrambling of the reading instructions is aging. Not entropy, not thermodynamics, information loss. This is a radically different picture from the one most people carry around. Most people think aging is about things wearing out, like an old car with rusty parts and bald tires. But it's not like that at all. It's more like a brand new car with a corrupted computer. The hardware is mostly fine. The software has bugs. And software bugs, unlike rust, can be fixed because the original code still exists. This is the extraordinary thing. The DNA, the underlying instruction manual, is still there. Intact. Complete. The problem isn't that the book has been burned. The problem is that the bookmarks are in the wrong places. And if you could somehow reset the bookmarks, put them back where they were when the cell was young, the cell should start reading the right pages again. It should start functioning like a young cell again. Now I want to be careful here because I'm about to tell you something that sounds too good to be true. And in science, when something sounds too good to be true, you should be suspicious. You should ask hard questions. So let me tell you the result first, and then let me explain why the physics not only allows it but practically demands it. Scientists have discovered that there are a small number of genes, a handful of transcription factors, that when you turn them on in an adult cell, they do something astonishing. They reset the epigenome. They take the scrambled bookmarks and put them back. The cell, which was old and confused and malfunctioning, starts behaving like a young cell again. Its gene expression patterns revert to what they looked like decades earlier. Its function improves. By every biological measure we know how to apply, the cell gets younger. These transcription factors were originally discovered in the context of something else entirely. A researcher was trying to take an ordinary adult skin cell and turn it back into a stem cell, a cell that can become any type of cell in the body, and he found that 4 specific genes could do this. Turn on these 4 genes, and a skin cell goes all the way back to a state like an embryonic cell. A total reset. It was remarkable. It won a Nobel Prize. But here's what's interesting for our story. If you turn on these genes for a long time, the cell goes all the way back to being a stem cell. It loses its identity completely. That's too far. But if you turn them on briefly, just for a little while, and then turn them off again, something wonderful happens. The cell doesn't lose its identity. A liver cell stays a liver cell. A brain cell stays a brain cell. But the epigenetic marks, the bookmarks, get tidied up. They get pushed back toward their youthful positions. The cell rejuvenates without losing its identity. It remembers what kind of cell it is, but it starts reading the manual the way it did when it was young. Now, why does this work? Why would there be a mechanism inside the cell that can reverse epigenetic aging? Think about it from an evolutionary perspective. Every time a new organism is conceived, an old egg cell and an old sperm cell combine, and the result is a brand new embryo with an epigenetic age of essentially 0. Every generation, the epigenetic clock gets reset. That means somewhere inside the cell there is a program, a mechanism, that knows what the youthful epigenetic state looks like and can restore it. There's a backup copy. The original settings are still in there. This is exactly what Claude Shannon, the father of information theory, told us would be necessary for any reliable communication system. Shannon showed in his famous paper back in 1948 that if you want to send a message through a noisy channel, a channel that introduces errors, you need a way to correct those errors. You need redundancy. You need a backup copy that you can compare against the corrupted version. Without it, every message degrades, every signal gets noisier, every copy is worse than the original. Is it all? Shannon worked this out for telephone lines and radio signals, but the principle is universal. It applies to any system that stores and transmits information, including living cells. And when you think about it, a cell is fundamentally an information processing machine. It reads instructions from DNA, manufactures proteins according to those instructions, and responds to signals from its environment. It's a communication system, and like any communication system, it's subject to noise. The epigenome is the channel. The youthful gene expression pattern is the original message. And aging is the noise that corrupts the message as it passes through time. Shannon's great insight was that noise doesn't have to be fatal. If you build enough error correction into the system, you can transmit a perfect message through an arbitrarily noisy channel. All you need is a way to detect errors and a backup from which to restore the original. And it turns out cells have exactly this. The youthful epigenetic program is stored somewhere. We don't yet fully understand where or how, but it's there because we can access it. We can trigger the cell to consult its backup and restore itself. The scratched disk can be reread from the master copy. This is, I think, one of the most beautiful connections in all of science. A theorem proved by a mathematician working on telephone cables in the 1940s turns out to explain how a 60-year-old's skin cells can be made to behave like a 20-year-old's. Shannon never thought about biology when he wrote that paper. He was thinking about sending signals across wires. But the mathematics of information doesn't care about the substrate. Information is information, whether it's encoded in electrical pulses, magnetic fields, or methyl groups on DNA. The same laws govern all of it. Let me give you the evidence. Because I don't want you to take my word for it. I want you to see the data. First, scientists developed a way to measure the epigenetic age of cells. It's called an epigenetic clock, and the story of how it was developed is itself remarkable. A researcher noticed that if you look at the methylation state, whether a methyl group is present or absent, at a few hundred specific locations on the genome, you can predict the age of the person with astonishing accuracy. 353 specific spots on the DNA. That's it. Out of roughly 28 million possible methylation sites, just 353 of them change in such a regular, predictable way with age that you can read them like the rings of a tree. In young cells, these locations have one pattern. In old cells, they have a different pattern. And the clock is accurate to within about 3 years for most tissues. That's remarkable. It works across different cell types. It works across different organs. It works in blood, brain, liver, kidney, skin. The same 353 sites track age everywhere. And this clock tells us something crucial, because it turns out the epigenetic age is not always the same as the chronological age. People who smoke have cells that look epigenetically older than their calendar age. People under chronic stress age faster epigenetically. People with certain diseases are epigenetically older. And people who exercise, eat well, sleep properly, their cells can be epigenetically younger than their birth certificate would suggest. The clock predicts mortality better than chronological age does. For math, let me repeat that because it's important. If you take two people who are both 60 years old, and one has an epigenetic age of 55 and the other has an epigenetic age of 65, the second person is more likely to die sooner from any cause, even though they were born in the same year. The epigenetic clock is measuring something real about the state of the body. Something that matters. Something that kills. This clock gave scientists a tool. For the first time in the history of medicine, they could measure whether an intervention actually made a cell younger, not just healthier or better functioning, but genuinely measurably younger at the epigenetic level. It was like being given a speedometer after driving blind for 1,000 years. And then they started testing those transcription factors I mentioned. They took old cells and briefly activated these reprogramming genes, and they measured the epigenetic clock before and after, and the clock went backward. Let me say that again because it deserves emphasis. The clock went backward, the cells got measurably, quantifiably younger, not by a small amount, in some experiments by years. The cells' methylation patterns shifted to resemble those of much younger cells. Their gene expression patterns reverted to more youthful profiles. Their function improved. Old neurons started firing like young neurons. Old skin cells started behaving like young skin cells. And the cells kept their identity. A liver cell stayed a liver cell. It just became a younger liver cell. This is not a minor result. This tells us something fundamental about what aging is. If aging were just accumulated damage, like dents in a car, you couldn't make it go backward by flipping a genetic switch. You'd have to individually repair every dent. But if aging is primarily an information problem, a corruption of the software, then you can fix it the way you fix any software problem. You restore from a backup. Now I know some of you are thinking that's cells in a dish. What about whole animals? Fair question. So let me tell you about the mice. But first, let me tell you about the experiment that proved aging is caused by epigenetic information loss in the first place, because this is a beautiful piece of science. Researchers created a genetically modified mouse with a very clever feature. They built in a system that would cut the DNA at about 20 specific locations in the genome when they gave the mouse a particular drug. These cuts were cleanly repaired every time, no mutations, no permanent genetic damage. The DNA was faithfully put back together. But the repair process requires the cell to mobilize its epigenetic machinery. The proteins that normally sit on the chromatin maintaining the epigenetic marks have to leave their post temporarily to go help with the repair. And when they come back, they don't always return to exactly the right place. So what happened to these mice? They aged rapidly. Their hair turned gray. They lost muscle mass. They became frail. Their cognitive function declined. Their organs deteriorated. They looked and behaved like mice, much older than they actually were. And when the researchers measured their epigenetic clocks, the clocks confirmed it. The mice were epigenetically old, even though chronologically they were still young. And the stunning part is this: there were no mutations. The DNA sequence was fine, the genetic information was intact. The only thing that had changed was the epigenome. The only thing that had degraded was the epigenetic information, the bookmarks. That experiment all by itself is almost proof of the information theory of aging. You can make a young animal old just by scrambling the epigenetic marks without changing a single letter of the genome. And then they ran the experiment in reverse. They took those prematurely aged mice and activated the reprogramming factors. And the mice rejuvenated, the epigenetic clock turned backward. The signs of aging improved. In a separate series of experiments, researchers took very old mice, we're talking the mouse equivalent of roughly 80 human years, 124 weeks old, and they delivered these reprogramming factors into the mice's bodies using a virus that carried the genes. They turned the genes on in a controlled cyclic fashion, on for a while, off for a while, so the cells would undergo partial reprogramming without losing their identity. And the results were extraordinary. The treated mice lived significantly longer than the untreated controls, not a little longer. The median remaining lifespan roughly doubled. They also showed improved health across multiple measures. Their frailty scores got better. They were functionally younger animals. And when the researchers measured the epigenetic age of the mice's tissues, liver, heart, muscle, the epigenetic clock had reversed. The tissues were measurably younger than they should have been. In another experiment, researchers took old mice with failing eyesight, a consequence of aging damage to the retinal neurons, and they activated these reprogramming factors just in the eye. The neurons in the retina rejuvenated. The mice's vision was restored. Old blind mice could see again, and when they measured the neuron's epigenetic age, it had reversed. The neurons were young again. These are not theoretical results. These are experimental facts published in major scientific journals, replicated by multiple independent laboratories. Aging reversal at the cellular and tissue level has been demonstrated. It is happening. It has happened in living animals. So let's come back to the physics. Why does the physics allow this? Let me tie this all together. The second law of thermodynamics says entropy increases in a closed system. You are not a closed system. Local entropy can decrease as long as total entropy increases. Life itself is a local entropy decrease. So far, nothing in the physics forbids aging reversal. But there's a deeper connection. And this is where I get genuinely excited, because it's the kind of connection that makes you realize the universe is more unified than you thought. In the 1960s, a physicist named Rolf Landauer at IBM proved something remarkable about the relationship between information and thermodynamics. He showed that erasing a bit of information, a single unit of information, one binary choice, requires a minimum amount of energy and generates a minimum amount of heat. The minimum is kT times the natural log of 2, where K is Boltzmann's constant and T is the temperature. It's a tiny amount. At room temperature, it's about 3 times 10 to the minus 21 joules. Practically nothing. But it's not zero. And that means information is physical. It's not some abstract, disembodied thing floating in a platonic realm. It has thermodynamic consequences. Information lives in the physical world, and the physical world notices when you mess with it. This resolved a century-old paradox, by the way. James Clerk Maxwell, back in the 1860s, had imagined a tiny demon sitting between 2 chambers of gas, opening and closing a little door to let fast molecules through one way and slow molecules through the other. The demon could separate hot from cold without doing any work, apparently violating the second law. For 100 years, nobody could quite explain what was wrong with Maxwell's argument. Landauer showed us. The demon has to observe the molecules, which means it has to store information about them in its memory. And at some point the demon's memory fills up and has to be erased. And erasing that memory generates exactly enough entropy to save the second law. The demon pays in information what it tries to steal in thermodynamics. The point is, information and entropy are 2 sides of the same coin. They are intimately, fundamentally, inescapably connected. And that connection runs in both directions. Destroying information costs you entropy. But restoring information from a backup, copying it from a pristine source to a corrupted one, that's not erasure. That's copying. And copying information, if you do it carefully, generates negligible entropy compared to erasing it. The physics of information tells us that losing information is thermodynamically costly, but recovering information from a backup is thermodynamically cheap. This is exactly the situation with aging and rejuvenation. The cell loses epigenetic information over time. That's aging. The information gets corrupted, like noise in a communication channel. But the backup copy, the youthful epigenetic program, is still stored somewhere in the cell. Restoring from the backup doesn't require violating any law of physics. It doesn't require reversing entropy. It doesn't require Maxwell's demon. It just requires activating the restoration program, which is precisely what those reprogramming factors do. Think of it this way. If you have a book, and the book is on a shelf, and over the years dust accumulates and the page is yellow and some of the ink fades, that looks like irreversible decay. The book is aging. But if somewhere in a vault there's a perfect master copy of that book, you can reprint a fresh copy anytime you want. You haven't reversed entropy. You haven't violated any law of physics. You've just used stored information to restore order. This is why cellular reprogramming works. This is why the epigenetic clock can run backward. This is why old mice can become young again. The physics doesn't just allow it. The physics practically predicts it once you understand that aging is fundamentally an information problem, not an energy problem. And this brings us to something even more remarkable. People have now discovered that you don't even need those original transcription factors. You can do it with chemicals, small molecules, simple chemical cocktails that push the epigenome back toward its youthful state without any genetic manipulation at all. No viruses needed, no gene therapy, just molecules in a dish. In experiments with tiny worms, chemical reprogramming increased lifespan by over 40%. In human cells, 6 different chemical cocktails were identified that restored youthful gene expression patterns in less than a week. Less than a week. The cells didn't need genetic engineering. They just needed the right chemical nudge to activate the restoration program that was already there. Stop and think about what that means for a moment. It means the backup system is not locked away behind some exotic genetic barrier. It's accessible. It's responsive to chemical signals. The cell is ready to rejuvenate. It's waiting for the instruction. It's as if the orchestra has been playing out of tune, and all you need to do is tap the conductor's baton on the music stand and say, "From the top." The musicians know the score. They remember the correct notes. They just needed the signal. What does this mean for the future? It means the backup system is not just accessible through some exotic genetic trick. It's a robust, built-in feature of the cell. The cell wants to be able to restore itself. Evolution built this capability in because every new generation requires an epigenetic reset. Think about that. Every generation, old cells make young organisms. The egg cell from a 35-year-old woman has the epigenetic machinery to generate a brand new human with an epigenetic age of 0. That reset happens every time a baby is conceived. The machinery for rejuvenation is standard equipment. It's not exotic, it's not rare, it's the most fundamental capability life has. Without it, the species would go extinct in 1 generation, because the children would be born as old as their parents. Now I want to take a step back and tell you what I think is the deepest lesson here, the one that keeps me up at night. For a long time we thought of aging the way we think of a rock rolling downhill. Gravity pulls it down. Entropy pulls you apart. It's a one-way trip, the arrow of time. But that picture is wrong. Aging is not like a rock rolling downhill. It's like a symphony orchestra that gradually goes out of tune. The instruments are still there, the sheet music is still there, the musicians are still there, they've just lost coordination. The epigenetic markings that tell each player what note to play and when have gotten noisy. And what makes this particular orchestra so special is that it plays continuously. It never stops. Your cells are expressing genes right now. Millions of protein molecules are being manufactured inside you this very second, each one according to the instructions being read from the DNA, guided by the epigenetic bookmarks. When the bookmarks are in the right place, the orchestra plays a magnificent symphony. Young tissue, vigorous organs, clear thinking, strong muscles. When the bookmarks drift, when the marks get sloppy, you start hearing wrong notes. A skin cell expresses a little too much of a gene meant for neurons. A liver cell turns off a gene it needs for detoxification. The symphony gets muddy, discordant, old. But if someone walks on stage and says, "Everyone stop, go back to your starting positions. Ready?" From the top, the orchestra can play again, beautifully, because nothing was actually broken. The information was just temporarily inaccessible. That is a fundamentally different kind of problem from what we thought we were dealing with. We thought we needed to fix a broken machine. Instead, we need to restore a corrupted signal. And signal restoration, as any engineer will tell you, is a solved problem. It's not easy, mind you, it's technically demanding, but it's not forbidden. It's not even all that surprising once you understand the physics. Let me address a few objections, because I know you have them and they're good ones. First objection. What about DNA damage? Don't mutations accumulate with age, and isn't that a real permanent loss of information? Yes, DNA mutations do accumulate, And yes, those are genuine permanent losses of genetic information. The backup copy of the genome isn't perfect. Some errors creep in every time a cell divides, and some accumulate from radiation and chemical damage over a lifetime. But here's the thing. Most cells in an old person have remarkably few mutations. The DNA repair machinery is extraordinarily good. We're talking about 1 mistake per billion letters per cell division, and there are additional repair systems that catch most of those after the fact. The number of mutations that accumulate over a human lifetime in most cells is small relative to the 3 billion letter genome. It's like a handful of typos in a library of books. In a library of books, they matter, eventually. Some of them cause cancer, but they are not the primary cause of the generalized decline we call aging, and the epigenetic reprogramming experiments prove this directly. In those experiments, cells are rejuvenated in the presence of whatever mutations they've accumulated. The mutations stay, they don't get fixed. But the epigenetic restoration still works. The cells still get younger by every measure. The epigenetic restoration doesn't fix the mutations, but it fixes the much larger problem, the loss of epigenetic coordination. It's like tuning the orchestra back up even though one violin has a small chip in it. The chip matters eventually, but the tuning matters far more right now. Second objection. If the body has a backup copy, why doesn't it just rejuvenate itself automatically? Why do we age at all? This is a wonderful question, and the answer comes from evolutionary biology. Evolution doesn't care about you after you've reproduced. Natural selection optimizes for reproductive success, not for immortality. The machinery for epigenetic maintenance exists because it's needed during development and reproduction. But evolution didn't bother to optimize it for a 90-year lifespan, because for most of evolutionary history, humans didn't live that long anyway. You'd be eaten by a lion or die of infection long before epigenetic drift became a problem. Aging is in some sense an oversight. Evolution built a magnificent machine with a built-in restoration system, but it didn't see any reason to keep running the restoration system after the machine had already done its evolutionary job. Third objection. Is this safe? If you reprogram cells too much, don't they lose their identity entirely and turn into something dangerous like a tumor? This is a serious concern, and it's why the science is proceeding carefully. The original reprogramming factors, when activated continuously, can indeed push cells all the way back to a pluripotent state, which is very close to what a cancer cell does. Uncontrolled growth, loss of differentiation. That's dangerous. But partial reprogramming, where you activate the factors briefly and then turn them off, doesn't do this. The cells rejuvenate without losing their identity. It's the difference between resetting a computer to factory settings, which wipes everything, and running a system restore, which fixes the errors while keeping your files. The field is actively developing safer methods, including chemical approaches that avoid the genetic factors entirely, and single-factor approaches that can rejuvenate without triggering pluripotency pathways. There is one more piece of this that I find absolutely breathtaking, and I want to end with it. The fact that epigenetic age can be measured and reversed means that we now have something we never had before in the history of medicine. We have a clock that can be read and reset. For all of human history, we had no way to measure biological age precisely. You could look at someone and guess, but that's not science. You could measure telomere length or blood markers, but those were noisy and imprecise. The epigenetic clock is different. It's accurate to within a couple of years, and it predicts death better than any other single biomarker we've found. So for the first time, we can test anti-aging interventions in real time. We don't have to wait 40 years to see if someone lives longer. We can measure their epigenetic age before an intervention, apply the intervention, and measure it again. If the clock goes backward, the intervention is working. We can iterate, we can optimize, we can do science, and the clock has gone backward. In cells, in tissues, in whole animals, in early human experiments with lifestyle interventions, diet and exercise programs specifically designed to target epigenetic health, participants showed measurable reversal of epigenetic age, a few years younger biologically after a few months of treatment. That's with lifestyle changes alone. The genetic and chemical reprogramming approaches are far more powerful. We are at the beginning of something extraordinary. And I don't say that lightly. I'm a physicist. I'm skeptical by nature. I don't like hype. But the physics is clear. There is no law of nature that demands you age. The second law of thermodynamics is not your enemy. You are an open system. Local entropy can decrease, and the specific mechanism by which you age, the corruption of epigenetic information, is reversible because the original information is still stored inside your cells. Let me put this in perspective. Think about what we believed 50 years ago. We believed aging was inevitable. We believed the second law demanded it. We believed that once damage accumulated, it could never be undone. We believed that the arrow of time had a biological equivalent, and that arrow pointed in one direction only, from youth to death. Every piece of that belief was wrong. Not approximately wrong, fundamentally wrong. And I want to be honest with you about what we don't know, because there is plenty. We don't know exactly where the backup copy of the youthful epigenome is stored. We don't know whether all tissues respond equally well to reprogramming. We don't know the long-term risks. We don't know whether partial reprogramming done repeatedly over a human lifetime would cause problems we haven't yet imagined. We don't know whether the backup copy itself degrades with time. These are real questions, and answering them will take years of careful work. But not knowing the answers to the engineering questions is very different from the physics being against you. And when people said we couldn't fly, they meant the physics forbade it. They were wrong. The physics was fine. We just hadn't built the right machine yet. When people say we can't reverse aging, they think the physics forbids it. The physics is fine. We just haven't built the right intervention yet. The universe is not your adversary in this fight. The universe is indifferent. And in that indifference, there is room to maneuver. People sometimes ask me as a physicist whether I think reversing aging is possible. And I tell them, look, the question isn't whether it's possible. The physics says it's possible. The biology says it's possible. Cells have already been rejuvenated. Tissues have already been rejuvenated. Mice have already been rejuvenated. The question isn't possibility. The question is engineering. Can we deliver the right signals to the right cells at the right time in a human body safely and precisely? That's an engineering problem, a hard one, perhaps the hardest one we've ever attempted. But it's not a physics problem. The physics is on our side. And I find that deeply, almost unsettlingly, hopeful, because it changes the nature of the project. We are not trying to violate a law of nature. We are trying to build a machine that works with the laws of nature. That is what engineers do. That is what engineers have always done. And they tend to succeed given enough time. The story of physics is largely the story of discovering that things we thought were impossible are merely difficult. We thought heavier than air flight was impossible. We thought splitting the atom was impossible. We thought seeing a single atom was impossible. We thought communicating instantly across the planet was impossible. Every one of those things is now routine, because the physics was never against us. We just hadn't understood the physics well enough yet. And isn't that a strange thing to realize? For millennia, humans have looked up at the stars and watched each other grow old, and shaken their heads and said, that's just how it is. The universe demands it. And it turns out the universe demands no such thing. We were never fighting the laws of physics. We were fighting a software bug. And software bugs can be patched. I keep coming back to that piano. The piano that went out of tune. Nobody looked at that piano and said, well, the second law of thermodynamics ruined the piano and there's nothing to be done. They called a tuner. The tuner came in, listened to each string, compared it to the correct pitch, and adjusted the tension. The piano played beautifully again. The entropy of the universe went up a tiny bit from the tuner's metabolic heat, and the piano went back to being a magnificent instrument. No laws were broken, no miracles required, just information, applied carefully. That is what we are learning to do with the human body. We are learning to tune it. We are learning to compare the current state to the correct state and adjust. The original score still exists. The cells still know the right notes. They just need someone or something to remind them. The oldest and most profound question humanity has ever asked is whether death is inevitable. And for the first time in the history of our species, physics is whispering an answer. Not yet, not quite, but soon. And the answer is no. It's not. It never was. We just didn't understand the question. If you followed all of that, I want you to sit with something. Here is your question. If aging is really an information problem and not an energy problem, what does that change about how you think about your own life right now, today? I'd love to hear what you come up with.